We are really excited to have you here and are so appreciative of the important work that you've all been doing over the last many months during this pandemic, preparing nutritious, good meals for people who are facing food insecurity in our community. And so thank you, first of all, for all of the work that you're doing. And thank you also for showing up. Just wanted to do a little level setting again. For those of you who are not familiar, I'm Mary Ruth Belzy-Prieb, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for Supervisor Chan in District 3 of Alameda County. And one of my roles, really the thing that I'm doing with Supervisor Chan is helping her scale up what we are calling All In Eats, which is the circular food economy of Alameda County. And you can kind of see some of the logos there in the slide that we're looking at right now. And the goal of this circular food economy is to build an economy that keeps finances and healthy food and health and sustainability circulating within one community, which means that we're keeping wealth and the environmental benefits and all of the other aspects of a circular economy within Alameda County. And so for us, that involves a whole bunch of things. There's sustainable farming, which is sequestering carbon in the soil and providing living wage jobs to farmers. And we have food hubs where cooks like you can come and incubate their businesses, but then we're also at the food hubs collecting all of the produce and the prepared meals and the recovered food and organizing it into bundles that we take out to people and deliver them in vans that are driven by re-entry individuals who are reintegrating back into the community. And then at the very end, we're recycling food and putting it back into composting so that it nourishes the soil and builds back into the environment that grows the food. And so all of this is part of the circular food economy, and your work is part of that work in that you are building healthy meals that are going to be eaten by people who will have improved health as a result of the work that you're doing. And so as you know, we've developed these nutrition standards for All In Eats, and our goal is to help you apply those nutrition standards in a way that makes sense for you and your community, and that is sensitive to your cultural heritage and your roots. And so tonight, we're just super, super excited to have 3 local chefs who are going to be presenting their takes on the All In Eats nutrition standards to help you think through how you can tweak your menus to be more healthy and in line with the All In Eats nutrition standards. So that's enough out of me. Thank you all for having us. I'm super excited to hear from these chefs and from Michelle, and I'm going to pass it over to Michelle now.
Great, thank you, Mary Ruth. Thanks for the overview, and welcome to everybody who's here. Some of you may have been at the last presentation we did about the nutrition standards, and thank you so much for the time that you took to be present. So this is sort of a continuation of that, with an opportunity for us to really plug into the diversity of food cultures, and the fact that, you know, as we're supplying these meals, we need to make sure that they feel useful and relevant to the folks who are receiving them. So I'm really excited tonight to be here with 3 chefs from the community. We have Chef Enrique Soriano, who's going to be talking about creating meals for Latinx communities. We have Chef Renee Lontoc, who will be talking about creating meals for Filipino and Asian communities. And we have Chef Robert Dorsey III, who will be talking about creating meals for Black communities as well as for vegetarians. And so I'm going to start us off with a little bit of an icebreaker. And I want to actually start, as I start most presentations, by acknowledging that we are on a lonely land and that we are in fact guests on the land of the traditional peoples here. And that particularly relates to tonight's presentation, because as we think about land, as we think about place, food is a big part of that. And so we want to make sure to situate our values around how we treat our food, around how we recognize diversity in food, you know, within the actual location where we are and the history of who's inhabited this location and how they were stewards to this land. I also want to acknowledge all of the people who are here with us tonight. We've chosen to focus on 3 different communities because those are some of the communities that have been most impacted and in need of food during COVID. but we want to really acknowledge that there's many people who have been receiving those meals, and there's many of you who have been preparing them. And so there's a lot of wisdom in this room that isn't necessarily from us speakers. And there'll be an opportunity at the end for you to really talk amongst each other and share some of the points that we may have missed and things that apply to your communities. So just a little bit of background. So I'm a nutritionist and herbalist. I've been part of Street Level Health Project, which is a free clinic in Fruitvale that serves primarily recent immigrant communities. We see most of our patients in Spanish, or MOM, which is an indigenous Guatemalan language. And I've been there for 12 years running my program. So I work a lot with the community around how nutrition gets applied, how it's accessible, and how it can happen in a way that respects the cultural values of the person in front of me and how they eat. I'm also a filmmaker, so if you saw the logo at the beginning about underexposed films, that is the other part of me. So I want to go to the next slide, please. And then the next one, yeah. So I want to briefly just sort of situate us in the idea of food and connection, and the fact that, food is not Safeway, food is not, the grocery store. Food is something that we share, and it connects us to our culture, it connects us to our families, it connects us to our communities. It has a big space of memory, I think, for a lot of us, in very different ways, whether that's traditional meals that we ate growing up, whether that's celebrations. And it also, as I said earlier, connects us to place and land, because our food comes from the land. So just really holding that as we approach this, we're thinking about it in that way, and with the significance that has. So we're not just handing people meals, we're really providing something that connects to their lives. So we're going to take a minute to just start off so that all of you can introduce yourselves to each other and have a voice for a moment. And I want us to sort of hold the question, what does being culturally responsive mean to you? Because a lot of the conversation tonight is really focused on how you as vendors working with All In can sort of be responsive to the cultural needs of the communities that you're creating food for. But it's a deep term that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So, and if it's something you haven't heard of before, I think just whatever it rings to you. But let's just take a couple minutes, and Edward's gonna pair us with 2 or 3 other people and just share your ideas on that, and then he'll bring you back in. So according to the National Center for Culturally Responsive Educational Systems, cultural responsiveness is the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture, as well as those from other cultures. And that quote was from the Latino Family Literacy Project. According to the National Institutes of Health, sorry, let me just move this. Cultural humility, which is another term I sort of want to enter into the equation, as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but one starts with an examination of his or her own beliefs and cultural identity. So I feel like these concepts are really important right now, particularly kind of as we're at a moment in time when, sorry, I'm gonna wait for it. Thank you. Particularly as we're sort of at a moment in time when there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding about knowing how to be supportive and relate to both difference and sameness. And as we approach food, it's really important to hold these values and to hold the fact that we sort of all come from a particular place and we need to know ourselves, but we also need to make space for learning about others and learning about, someone that I'm very close to once said, treat people the way they want to be treated, not treat people the way we want to be treated. So really the idea of learning how other people want to be treated, when you're preparing a meal that's getting delivered to them. And I want to just first of all acknowledge that this may well be territory that all of you are aware of, all of you are already embracing. So, no assumptions that isn't already happening. This is just sort of a moment to reflect. Before we turn the floor over to the chefs, I want to just offer some reflections on the COVID-19 meals that have been in Oakland to date. Through my work at Street Level Health Project, I was able to get this feedback from some of our partners at East Oakland Collective, at Homies Empowerment Project, at Tribe, at Punks with Lunch. And really sort of their feelings. This sort of came in around December, or maybe a little after that, January, February. But just to note, these are not reflections that pertain to the work that any of you are doing as vendors at All In, because most of these organizations at that time had not been getting meals from All In. So a lot of these came from other places. And I want to just sort of offer these reflections without any finger pointing, but more just as a way for all of us to hold, what sort of things we can be wary of and look for in the future. I'm just going to read off a list of content that's sort of divided into these categories. This is sort of how I split up a lot of the feedback that the different organizations and individuals offered. On quantity, what we found was that particularly on high volume meals of 150 plus, portions were often too small and too heavy on rice and carbs. I spoke at length about that during my last presentation, so I'm not going to go into depth now. But again, just sort of making sure there's balance in those meals. Portions should be as large as possible, particularly vegetables and proteins. And again, just reflecting that if somebody's receiving this food, it may be the only healthy food that they have access to that day. So let's be as generous as possible so that people can stretch it out and make it last. I definitely hear from my patients, that they're having to stretch these meals for more than one sit down. So the feedback I got was sort of that quality varies greatly. The closer the connection between the group distributing the meals and those making them, the better, as this promotes more accountability. Better quality from restaurant-made meals in smaller quantities of 50 to 100 meals than huge food service-made meals or meals in mass of 200 or more. Large quantity meals, and they were specifying 150 plus, are often delivered too cold, have less variety, and have a shorter fridge life. Best if several meal options are available per day, allowing for variety is ideal. Sometimes food looked old and stale, and sometimes it was outright rotten. And again, that's not pertaining to everything by a long shot, but just to note that freshness is important. Meals were often extremely underseasoned. Probably this was reflected to me, probably in an attempt to have the most universal appeal, but sometimes it was just sort of a lowest common denominator resulting in bland food. Meat was sometimes undercooked, which we know can be dangerous. With nutrition, providing well-balanced carb, starch, protein, vegetable, low salt meals has been appreciated by clients. So again, sort of, I think sometimes this picks out the negative, but there was plenty of positive. Often vegetables were unfortunately skipped entirely and meals were only chicken and rice. That is something that I heard from my colleagues at Street Level Health Project as well. Allowing CBOs to choose restaurants to partner with that improves the cultural relevance of the food. So community-based organizations being able to say, hey, our folks want Latinx food, our folks want soul food, our folks want hearty, healthy food, salads, sandwich boxes. That has resonated most with the clients of the person who gave that feedback. But I think in general, the idea of trying to partner organizations with the folks who make food in those communities works best. Noting that many people often prefer to avoid pork. That was a sort of general feedback that was given. That offering hearty vegetarian and vegan meals that are not dependent on soy was appreciated, because a lot of folks who are vegetarian or vegan don't always want to be eating soy. Often too few options that appeal to African American families and individuals. And this feedback came from someone who said, it's important to be working with Black chefs and restaurants to mitigate this issue. Similarly, also too few options for Latinx families and individuals, and important to be working with chefs from that community. A lot of families in that community reported deconstructing the meals to turn them into something that was more appealing for their family. From an organization that primarily serves Latino families from Homies, the best meals included rice, beans, a salad, and a protein, and featured Latino seasonings. We are striving for organic plant-based options that are culturally centered, and that's when we had some challenges. Many of the restaurants that cook organic plant-based options were using products like soy and certain vegetables that appeared foreign to our community. So again, making sure there's familiarity with who's going to be eating the meal. Temperature, cold meals do not work well for unhoused communities because there isn't necessarily a way to warm them up. That kind of goes without saying. Most do not have the ability to cook safely and lack access to water. Hot meals are definitely preferred if you're dealing with unhoused communities. Housed individuals seem to prefer hot meals to cold meals as well, but shelters with cold storage sometimes benefit from cold meals. However, the flip side of that is that it's a big challenge when hot meals arrive cold and soggy. Despite preferences for hot meals, they're often more challenging for distributors to safely deliver. It's useful if vendors can be predictable and upfront about what temperature meals they will be delivering. That's a big help for the organizations that will be handing them out. I'm going to try and plow through this because I know we're short on time. Groceries, receiving groceries is really popular among clients and among a lot of my own patients. Because again, if they have their own kitchens, that way they get to create their own food. So that's, that's a feedback more reflected on the level of how All-In's programming happens. Shelf-stable food, meat, produce, bread, dairy, milk, and milk alternatives, butter, and eggs are often appreciated. Containers and delivery. So I believe this is going to be a conversation that's going to go much more broadly and much deeper into All-In the future. But the feedback that I got pertaining to those was it's important to make sure extra food is not just getting dumped at unhoused encampments, as people are often dealing with issues around rats and vermin. So really being mindful of not having trash disposal is also a huge issue at encampments. So cutting down on packaging is essential. Compostable containers are great, though it's still important to cut down on excess as many encampments have no place to compost. So I specifically was interested in sharing some of this feedback regarding unhoused situations, but I do know that for All-In, a lot of times you're dealing with people who are not unhoused. For specific needs and favorites, for elders and many unhoused people, dental care can be a very specific challenge. So be sure to think about, is this something that can be easily chewed for all categories of the meal, the protein, the vegetables, and the carbs? Again, that could sort of come into the realm of offering options. So maybe you think about creating one meal that's mindful for people who might have dental issues, even if not all the meals you're providing that day are. And finally, some of the most popular items from one of the organizations were protein, eggs, walnuts, produce, fresh juice, especially for elders and folks with dietary restrictions and large families. I know for us and our nutrition standards, we're not really providing juice, but I just wanted to share that for many people who are food compromised, that is sometimes appreciated, as well as burritos, spaghetti, and sandwiches. So that's the feedback that I got from many of our community-based organizations, and we are so grateful for the work that they're doing. And without further ado, if we can turn to the next slide, I am going to introduce Chef Enrique Soriano. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Enrique.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. And as you mentioned, my name is Chef Enrique Soriano. I am a first-generation Mexican-American, raised here in Oakland, California. My parents migrated here from Michoacan. When they migrated here, they switched from working from the flea market and all that, but they were always entrepreneurs, and they ended up buying a taco truck in LA, and they established that here in East Oakland in 1997. And there I pretty much spent my whole life, working that truck. And by the time I was able to graduate high school, I went to culinary school in San Francisco at the California Culinary Academy. And from there, I just pretty much bounced around different restaurants, getting from Sequoia National Park and then Big Sur, California, and then to San Francisco around various restaurants, and then finally catering, and finally finding my own place called Cocina del Corazon. We did start off as a catering company, but unfortunately with COVID, we did have to pivot. But our main objective has been and always will be to heal our community through our craft and to spread awareness of food disparities and injustices that negatively affect our people and our planet. Um, and we do that especially with the food justice aspect in collaboration with various organizations, including Mandela Partners, World Central Kitchen, Community Kitchens, and High Road Kitchen, by providing hot meals and cold meals to different communities all over Oakland, from the unhoused to the housed, young and old. And we also have a firm believing in circular food economics as well, because I was mentioned earlier, it was very important to keep our community thriving and to support each other in our local economy. And it's something that we've especially learned during the pandemic. Um, and you know, we believe that it is very important to feed folks culturally relevant food, and which is where we come in as a Latinx chef. For me, as we were just talking about culturally responsive, uh, one of the main reasons of why it is very important to have culturally relevant offerings is because I'll share a story. Recently, we went to do a meal drop off to an encampment. It was the first time that I had joined this group, and we were dispensing food. And once people found out what we were offering, because I was telling people what it was, and people, oh, it's Mexican, and they were just really excited. And she's like, wow, you see, this is what we're talking about. Sometimes these folks don't even want to eat. You know, they see, you know, and that's very important, because if it's not, it doesn't really speak to people. You know, it's just like ourselves. We have this human nature. If we don't like something, we're not going to eat it. And human nature applies to everyone. And so that's why it's very important that we have food that can relate to people. That way they don't go and towards the unhealthy alternative that they can probably purchase with cheaper money or whatever. And with that, I'll go to what is the general Latino diet really consists of a lot of spices like dried chilies, oregano, um, cumin, allspice. Um, Especially the Latino diet nowadays has been really changed, as we mentioned, when people migrate here to, well, during our breakout, we mentioned that when people migrate to the United States, they become very unhealthy. It's because of what is available, and the way that we tend to eat has become more colonized. So it's why it's important that we provide these food for them. The most types of food that we like to prepare is more guisados. As you can see, it's more guisados, more of a braise, and we'll braise anything: pork, chicken, beef. The most common veggies that we like to use are tomatoes, corn, cactus, cilantro, chilies, summer squash, chayote squash. But people like to confuse the Latin style with being very spicy, which is not very true. It may be true for the Mexican diet, but it's not true for more of the our southern hermanos. Um, the most common starches that we do have is sweet potatoes, um, beans of all kinds. And in Mexico, we have various different types of beans. That's so the rest of Latin America. We love garbanzos and we love our rice. It's not the healthiest type of rice, which is why we step in and we prepare these foods differently. As our duty as a chef, especially with the Latino diet, we don't currently eat as much veggies as we like, which is why it's very important for us to introduce more vegetables. As we spoke about earlier, it should be about 50% of the plate should be vegetables, non-starchy, and you know, bell peppers, spinach, and all that is really good. We like to incorporate a lot less oil. And the reason that I like to do braiding a lot and grilling is that we can incorporate a lot less oil. It's the way that I like to do with my cuisine. Um, we also know that we have to incorporate a lot less salt. I did the numbers that a typical dish should carry about a quarter teaspoon of salt. And when we cook for about 100 people, that equates to about a half a cup of total to salt. And the way I know that for chefs, it's very difficult to control their salts, especially in the Latino diet. We do tend to eat a lot of salt. And the way I figured out to kind of control this is to use the salt sparingly, meaning that we know certain dishes can do with less salt. As for example, some veggies can take less salt. So I would use more of the salt for the meat product. And when I'm doing certain like things for like beans, I would take out a lot less of the liquids so that I'm using less salt to season the liquids and more of the beans itself. Um, and as well as for vegetarian dishes, we mentioned that we we use a lot of less soy, but the Latino cultures, we have a lot of vegetarian dishes that include stuff with like the summer squash, potatoes, that we do a lot of these salads that we mix with different things. We mix with cheeses as well. But I like to substitute a lot of cauliflower, a lot of portabellas, because we love the cauliflower in our cuisine. Um, and one thing that I like to incorporate is jackfruit. Jackfruit is really good. Um, it's really good at emulating when you know how to season it right. One thing that people really complain about vegetarian food is that it's very bland. One secret that I like to share is that I like to use nutritional yeast and amino acids to help flavor vegetarian dishes to give them more of a little meatier aspect, and always go with a lot of spices because we are using a lot less. And for the spices, like I mentioned, we use a lot of oregano. Very good fan of oregano, black pepper, some cumino, not a lot, and some tomillo, which is thyme. So this is where I kind of get to talk to you about more, give you guys an example of one of the meals before I really talk in depth about how I really get to creating my menus, because I know this is one of the hardest things when you're creating meals is how do you get a lot of different menus and different items. So for these two items that I hear that's transformational, there's different that's cooked healthily. We have our pechuga de pollo adobado, and we're really good on marinades in our Latino culture, and adobados is really one of the biggest things. We very simple, dry chili rub, and you can use the different types of spices. For here, I used ancho chilies, a little bit of oregano, and some vinegar as well as other spices. For our veggies, we introduced kale. Kale is not very readily available. We don't really use it a lot, but one way that we really can relate to it culturally is that acelgas. And acelgas is very popular in our Latin culture. And so I was able to kind of bridge that and use that to this plate because we are very big on acelgas, and I up the quantity. And it's not in the picture, but frijol rojo refrito. We do love refried beans. The way I prepare my refried beans in a healthy manner is that once the beans are done cooking, instead of going again and frying the beans with a lot of manteca, lard, or oil, I just grab a little bit of oil, a small amount, probably like a half cup, and I'll caramelize maybe 2 or 3 whole onions on the side and get that really nice caramelize, and I'll just add that to the beans. So it helps me give it that creaminess and almost that faux refrito. So it's definitely a lot more healthier. And the pollo adobado gets baked, so there's no more oil necessary. So and you can control your salt added to that as well. The other dish that I have on here is the guisado de res con nopales and cebolla, which goes back to one of the biggest styles of cooking, which is a guisado, a braise. And here's the that I use. I like to use a. I don't like to use the word cheap, but a more economical cut of meat. Um, so I can use beef, And with that, I accompany it with nopales. Cactus is very huge in our culture, with caramelized onions, and I I toast some chiles japones, some red chilies, and blend that in, and just add that with some guajillos, and let that braise in there. And like I said, with the braise, there's no need to add oils or any more fats and whatever, and I let that go. And we also add some espinaca and cilantro to that as well. So we like to add different types of vegetables and to sneak in as much as possible. And then finally, the substitute for the arroz is a very famous platillo. Is arroz blanco con maíz, which is a white rice with corn. It's typically found in different cultures, but we know that we like to stick with our brown rices or wild rices or alternate grains. And for here, I use pearl barley. I found that it pairs really well with the sweet corn. I love, you have to really toast the barley really well in order to achieve a good flavor. These two menu items are almost like a template that I like to plug and play for my menu inspiration. So it's always important to do budget balancing. I know it's very important for chefs, that we know that when we're providing meals for the community, we also have to make sure it's more feasible for us. So what I like to do is I like to use really good cuts of chicken breast. You can get them really for a really economical price, already cut. Chicken thighs as well. I mentioned earlier I like to use I like to buy them whole beef, cheaper cut. It's all lifter and it's a lot cheaper. Ground beef, ground turkey, and the way I build my dishes is we know that the three components: our vegetables, our proteins 25%, our vegetables are 50%, and our starches slash grains are 25% or less. Um, and so to follow the Latin cuisine diet, I always want to plug and play and say, I know that I can have a chicken breast. I can either grill it, I can either braise it, the guisados, which is either was typical with chilies or whatever, or I can do cuts and saute them on the plancha. And from there, I kind of just plug and play and switch with the potatoes the same way as because like there's different ways to cook the same item, like I was mentioned. Like for example, the potatoes, we can present the sweet potato as on the planchas, nice and seared off. And the next day we can probably, or for the next week, we can probably do the mashed sweet potatoes. And probably the week after that, we can present the uh, sweet potatoes with probably some onions and present it with some other veggies. And so um, that always helps me when I'm trying to build my plates, is to have some kind of a template, and I just kind of plug and play by bringing in what my strengths are, making a list of what my strengths are, what I know how to cook, and then just saying, plugging in different dishes. Like say, I know how to make a really good birria. I know this recipe really well. I can switch different proteins, and I can make it vegetarian by using the same ingredients. And it's always important to gather your community feedback from the folks that you're feeding. You always get a good wealth of what you should cook from your peers. It's the very hardest things for a chef, I know, is to how much of what do you buy. Especially when you're preparing meals in mass. I like to gauge 100. From 100, I know that I can break down to 50 or break down to 25. Um, I know 6 ounces of meat is I usually gauge about 8 ounces, and 40 pounds of meat is a case of of chicken, which is about for 100 people, which is the way I gauge for my 100. But let me start from the top. For 4 cups of rice, uh, 1 cup of dried rice equals 4 cups of rice. So we know that 6.5 quarts of dried rice equals 100 serving. 1 cup of dried beans is enough for 2.5 to 3 cups cooked, which will equate to 8.5 quarts, 8.25 quarts of dried beans. The meat portions, I like to go a little bit more, like Michelle said. I definitely up the portions to 8 ounces because she said it is important that people do reheat the foods. I think the most important thing too is to always make the food with a lot of love, to always plate it with a lot of dignity, to always document and share what you do so you can able to inspire more people.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I just want to reiterate what he said about making it with love, because that was something that all of the community-based organizations said they could really feel when there was sort of a sense of respect and love and accountability in how things are prepared. So that really comes through. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chef Renee Lantak, who's going to talk a bit about making food for the Asian community. And then after that, we're going to have Chef Robert Dorsey. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us.
My name's Renee Lantak, and I'm the chef owner of Thank You Grill. And I specialize in Filipino style barbecue. So first off, let me say I want to say thank you from Thank You Grill for your time, and I'm truly honored to deliver the Asian community meals part of this presentation. So here's a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go over some highlights and accomplishments. We're going to go over some healthy options in the Asian diets, healthy examples versus unhealthy examples, my why. I'm going to share some helpful tips and suggestions. We're going to compare some traditional meals versus transformational community meals. Community meals count to date and positive impacts that this project has affected my business and appreciation as well. So Thank You Grill is located at Ashland Market and Cafe. Our address is 16395 East 14th Street in San Leandro. Since our grand opening back in April of 2019, Thank You Grill has been recognized as one of the best Filipino eateries in the Bay Area. We consistently deliver great tasting Filipino style dishes at an affordable price and have created menu items that you cannot get anywhere else and are so delicious that it makes our customers come back wanting more. So if you're ever nearby or passing through this area in Ashland, I highly recommend that you stop by, say hi, and I'll give you a sample of the best Filipino style barbecue chicken ever. So that's a picture of me and my wife right there in our little kiosk. I barbecue right outside, and that's my menu at the kiosk as well. So our mission is to give my fellow Filipinos a tasty reminder of home while introducing the delicious flavors of the Philippines to the wider community. And our vision statement is to end hunger throughout the world by using the power of food to inspire people who want to make a difference in their community. And we're actually doing that in county level with partnering up with everyone, with this community. So I'm honored. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. So here are some highlights and accomplishments. So I did my first pop-up in Oakland. I had a huge 12-foot table. I wanted everyone in the community to who didn't know each other to just talk and meet and greet each other. It was a chance for neighbors to meet other neighbors that they never even knew that was just down the street. And I got to see this Banh Mi sandwich over here. I got to implement that, do a trial test at the farmer's market in 2018. That's the only thing I sold there. And then that was in preparation for the grand opening for the Ashland Market and Cafe, my little kiosk. And then I still do pop-ups throughout the Bay Area with Novel Brewing Company. And then my biggest accomplishment to date is I was the first vendor to be selected to produce meals for the Emergency Food Production Grant. So here are some examples of healthy examples and unhealthy examples of traditional Asian diets. I'm just going to read a couple of them, just highlight a few. Green tea, if you've ever gone to an Asian restaurant, green tea is actually recommended before, during, and after. It's an option that's presented throughout the whole thing. Fish and seafood. So Philippines, we're an island, we're surrounded with water. So the ocean is a very important resource for us. And traditions of controlling portions and sizes. I got a funny story. I was visiting the Philippines. We were just over there on vacation. and we went to a McDonald's. I thought I supersized my menu order. It was a Big Mac with fries, and I was like, you know what? I think they made a mistake because I wanted some more fries. This doesn't look like a supersize. So right before I was about to go and complain, I got the wrong size. My brother-in-law grabbed me and he goes, dude, that is our supersize. That is our big menu, our big portion. I was like, okay, well then I just need to go get some more. So the portion control between the Philippines or Asian countries compared to the portion control with the United States is pretty huge. And then the unhealthy examples, unhealthy trans fats in snacks are not labeled on packages. There's a lot of street vendors out there in Asia. For like a soda, they'll just give you a clear plastic bag and a straw sometimes, not really labeled, so you're not gonna get any nutritional factors from there. And then too much salt, a lot of people, they just tend to just put too much salt when it's not even needed anymore. This is my why, my family history with heart disease, to kind of implement a healthier alternative. I have two uncles that survived heart attacks, and I had another uncle that didn't in the Philippines. I had an uncle that had successful heart transplant 2 years ago, and then unfortunately my father passed away after complications from his heart surgery back in 2017. And then I also have high blood pressure, but a healthier diet, which I'm doing with these meals, and regular exercise, I'm keeping it under control. So here are some helpful hints that should help you out, and some suggestions. So try cooking less of the white rice and carbohydrates. Salty soy sauce, you can use the alternative. It's on the right-hand side. You can use the low sodium, and instead of white rice, you can use brown rice. Instead of processed meats, you can use the chicken, the fish, the soy sauce, or the tofu. There's alternatives. It's just a matter of choice and just, making the right substitution that will go with your recipe. And then sugary drinks and juices, and then processed snacks. So you can add more vegetables. So this is my comparison. This is my thank you bowl that I have at the kiosk here. I do steamed rice, barbecue sauce, barbecue chicken, boneless, skinless thighs, pickled papaya, cilantro, jalapenos, Filipino-inspired salad dressing, and I just splash it with some barbecue sauce. I had a delivery for some community meals for La Familia. It's another partnership that I had. And she had called me or emailed me saying that there's some folks that have some dietary needs, especially diabetes and all that stuff. So I had to think out the box. So what I did was I substituted the steamed rice with some spring mix or kale. I omitted the extra barbecue sauce. I still put the pickled papaya in there. I added more vegetables. So I put more tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, and some croutons, and I still added the salad dressing. So that way it fits more of the standard. Community meals up to date. With D salad at 2,942, La Familia 2,784, Reach program just down the street 1,078, and a grand total of last year, we had to make a pivot because of COVID-19. Let's see right there. So 6,805 meals last year total. So here's the positive impact that it had, me doing this project. I extended my menu by adding a version of transformational community meals to my menu. So for folks who want a healthier alternative, they have it. And I had to get out of my comfort zone in order to develop new techniques and new recipes. So I'm a better chef than I was before. So this kale salad, you can actually add chicken to it, or there's a new tofu. I did it as a banh mi, or else you can also have it as a thank you bowl also. So this community meals project has given me the opportunity to show the surrounding community my appreciation for coming in and supporting us since we've opened our doors back in 2009. Thank you from Thank You Grill for all your support, because without you guys, our doors would have closed.
Thank you so much, Renee. We
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. And I just want to throw in something that we covered in more detail back in the nutrition presentation, which I think you all have access to if you didn't get a chance to see it. But both Renee and Enrique brought up, trying to be mindful of salt. And so just a reminder, sort of how I approach it with my patients a lot of the time is just thinking of the abundance of all different kinds of seasonings that we all have access to. And so we don't utilize those all of the time, but we can bring in so many different herbs and spices to our meals. We can bring in lemon, we can bring in vinegars, we can, fermented foods bring a sense of saltiness and texture as well. So just being creative with the many flavors that we have that don't have to depend on salt. And then including the use of aminos and low sodium soy. So yeah, thank you so much. That was great. And without further ado, I am super pleased to present Robert Dorsey, who's going to talk a bit about two topics. He's going to talk about really being mindful of how we bring food that is culturally relevant to the Black community in Oakland, which is definitely a large portion, along with the Latinx community, of who has been accessing a lot of these meals. And just ubiquitous throughout the feedback I got was that people were not always feeling heard in and seen in the types of meals that they were getting. And so what that looks like. And I believe Robert's also going to cover a little bit about vegetarian, which I appreciate because I've been vegetarian since I was 16. And I'm glad when that also gets seen. So turning it over to you, Robert, thank you so much.
Hello to everyone. I'm so honored to sit on this panel today. It means so much to me. I'm a Bay Area chef. I currently run a company that is Robert Dorsey Catering and Events. I've been in the food space here in the Bay Area for the last 35 years. Born and raised Oakland, Berkeley. Most of my family is raised in East Oakland, and probably had at one point about 200 relatives in the city of Oakland. So I got some really deep roots here. But in the food space, I started as a young guy. It's 14 years old, and I actually came from a food desert, which was actually in my own home. So this is near and dear to me, being able to provide food for people that are, unhoused, and those who don't have access to, quality food or food alone. So this is really huge. But as a young guy, I got into the industry, started working like full time, growing up in Berkeley, and I really had a love affair for food. And so it was an outlet for me to get away from my household and to be able to, feed myself and to begin to enjoy feeding others. So it's something that's really special for me. But as a professional, I have owned and operated restaurants in here in the Bay Area over the past about 15, 16 years, and have always made it a point to, as a mission throughout my companies, to have a social impact component. Again, being where I come from and where my family comes from in East Oakland, I have unfortunately, witnessed and experienced, death and kind of like poverty in the community. And a lot of it has to do with access to education, access to food, access to opportunities. So throughout, my company, one of my goals is to generate wealth in business, so that my company can be a conduit to young people finding their way. I founded a program called the Junior Chef Society back in 2014, a nonprofit that was self-funded. So it was short-lived, but it gave me the opportunity to touch base with a lot of Oakland and Bay Area youth and give them the opportunity to see how food was grown and to show them that the culinary industry was a way out of a life of, for lack of better words, life of crime and violence. So that is still a mission of ours. And we partnered recently with Beyond Emancipation. It's an organization that helps young people that are transitioning from the foster care system and sometimes coming from incarceration to self-sufficiency. So, we definitely need food, and we need to know how to prepare it. So excited about, growing that relationship. And so that's, my quote on the bottom there, being able to provide access to nutritious meal gives individuals the opportunity and the decency to, move forward with, growth and ascertaining other things in their lives. Sourcing food. I know a lot of times with, preparing food in bulk, for large groups, one thinks, gosh, how can I do this and have this be economical? I know there's a lot of, partners, some which were listed earlier, Dig Deep Farms, and there's a lot of other local, socially focused organizations in the city of Oakland and surrounding community, Alameda County, that, focus on working with restaurants and caterers to, provide access to their crops. And a lot of them will, if you form a relationship, they'll give you first access to a lot of their goods. And with our Mediterranean climate here, there's a robust bounty of peppers, tomatoes, chard, kale, zucchini. There's so much that we can grow here. So I think that the more we can shift to that direction, the better. But also, if you're working with local vendors, produce purveyors, and even if you're shopping at big box stores, a lot of local people, a lot of local farms will forge relationships with some of the supermarkets and farmers markets. So I think that it's just a great way to source. And just kind of broaden here, just a little bit about the delivery option versus shopping. I know food safety is something that I just want to touch on briefly, is that, a lot of the big box stores are sourcing in bulk. And I know it's times where I've even stepped into those stores where a lot of the produce is inferior. So it's not, sometimes it's not the best quality. So a lot of local operations can give you a better product to pass on to your clients, because at the end of the day, the shelf life of that product and the quality and nutrition in that product, that meal is going to be really important. Portioning and balancing the plate, we need to make certain that those who are looking for maybe their only square meal of the day, that those portions of protein in relation to the starches that are prepared, the starches and vegetables, that it's a fine balance. And that, as individuals kind of extending a hand to the community, that those meals are prepared with a lot of care and just a lot of pride. I know that when preparing in bulk, things can get really busy and trying to figure out how to get the food out the door. And if there's, if there's things overlooked in presentation, a lid is slapped on, when that goes out or is handed to someone, I know it can make you feel great when you open up a hot plate of food or warm plate of food, and things are presented in a way that look like they came out of a restaurant or they were prepared just for you. So that's a big thing. And then just talking briefly about estimating shopping needs for preparing in bulk. I know when I am preparing larger meals, if I'm trying to provide a portion of 6 to 7 ounces of a protein, I'll go a few ounces over to trim, off fat, and also to, cut out parts of, say, a chicken thigh that has gristle or something that you're not going to be able to utilize. And I've experienced it myself when, preparing food in bulk, where I was like, oh, we're going to get 6 ounces. And you do the math, and all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, I'm short like 30 portions. And then you're trying to, spread the food. And I think that might be, something that, I think Michelle, mentioned about the some portion sizing that can be alleviated if we just plan a few ounces over, for the meals to make sure we get the proper yield. I'm going to dive kind of right into the African American diet and just really honoring heritage when preparing food for the African American community. I mean, some of my fondest memories in life are, having family, share meals at the holidays, huge family. We always get together and everyone bringing a dish. So, we'd have like 100 people and one aunt has brought like 6 pies or cakes. Someone else has macaroni and cheese. We got all this food piling in. And I've got cousins who they'd come in and they'd make their plate and head out to the car before we even say grace and have the meal. So a lot of food, right? And then there's food left over after that. So in the African American community, generally, a lot of people are dealing with hypertension, high cholesterol, and diabetes. And again, this links back to education and then also access to healthcare, access to decent healthcare. And there's this huge disparity. And so when you couple that with our traditional diet, which I can attest to, if I open an aunt's cupboard or cabinet, it's the salt, the seasoning salt, garlic salt, whatever you name it, black pepper, lemon salt. There's just a lot of salts and spices, and not realizing what those additives are in those ingredients. So what I've done over the years, and for clients, is kind of taking some traditional items and transforming them into healthier options and finding a balance, because a lot of times people want to taste those flavors that are very familiar to them. And so I kind of put a menu down here of some of my favorites, which are candied yams, collard greens, fried chicken, cornbread, a little butter going on with that. And so it's how do you take a meal like this, which is could be a typical Sunday dinner, and how do you take this meal and lower the fats, the salt, and in the same time possibly introduce some healthier ingredients into this meal. So I'll cover that in the next slide. Like I said, that last slide would be one of my favorite meals to have on a Sunday. And here with this meal, this is the blackened chicken with fresh citrus. Even for families, I've tried to prepare meals that are healthier, or come to the potluck or the dinner with things that are fried chicken that's not fried, or barbecue that is not trenched with sauce. Or I've gotten the side eye, and I think that I could see a lot of folks in the community kind of giving a side eye to what's this quinoa, or what are these other ingredients that I'm unfamiliar with. And this has been the case when I've seen folks receive like CSA boxes or even grocery bags, even from the food bank, Alameda County, where someone has a rutabaga or eggplant, which I know probably a list of 50, 60 people that have never seen either item or tasted either of those items. So here I take this chicken, rub this down with spices like ancho, garlic, a little bit of olive oil, dash of kosher salt, black pepper, cilantro, a little cumin. So in this way, I build up, a nice flavor profile. So when that's marinated and then hits the oven, it just gives another level of flavor that I think a lot of people are looking for when they bite into, say, a fried chicken that is, coated with buttermilk and then coated with flour and all those spices in there, and all the fat that's been retained in frying the chicken. You can get that by, a nice marinade of all, natural spices and herbs. And then also through the cooking process, of either oven roasting this on a high heat at 425 degrees. The skin caramelizes and gives you just a different effect there that I've found to be highly effective in introducing these types of transition meals. And then also here I have oven baked yams with sweet spices, which are your baking spices like clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Spices that would traditionally go in a candied yam, but it's not the pound of butter and the 4 cups of brown sugar and the dash of maple syrup. But this is simply, taking a fresh garnered yam and roasting it in the oven and splitting it open after, 40 minutes or so. What I've done with larger meals is I've actually taken the yam even in the skin and just cut it and left the skin on, because that's a lot of nutrients there. And, added those spices, then maybe a little bit of a citrus there and some pecans, kind of add some, nuttiness and more protein there. And then on there, I braised mustard greens with forest mushrooms. One of the things I do for greens to take out, say, the ham hock or the fat back or bacon is to always keep on hand caramelized onions and, garlic confit, which is just, garlic cooked down in a little bit of olive oil, shallots, things like that. Tomatoes pick up a lot of flavor, kind of gives you a little umami when it comes to, preparing greens, and a dash of olive oil, again, versus all of the fat that would come out of, say, a fatback or a ham hock. And that gives you, a meal that contains the kind of essential ingredients, but you're getting away from a lot of the fat, the sugars, and the salts there. Here is another dish that would typically replace, like a fried pork chop or even a braised pork shoulder, which is actually one of my favorites, and probably a dish that, my doctor would say you should probably, have in moderation. But you can get a lean pork loin or even pork tenderloin. I know pork tenderloins are, considerably, higher in price per pound than a pork loin, but still packs a lot of flavor, and generally they can be pretty lean. On a pork loin, generally you have a little bit of a fat cap that you can trim off. And again, here, bringing in a lot of spices, even a light brine on a pork loin can give you a lot of flavor, where you don't have to add additional salt, but you can brine, overnight, and some salts and small amounts of sugar and natural herbs like bay, which we have growing here, here in Oakland and the Bay Area, fresh thyme, garlic, onions, a lot of aromatics that a lot of people don't realize that if you put them all together, they can give you a mouthful of flavor. And then things like, an apple chutney, which can keep, you can make apple chutney, you can make gallons of apple chutney, and it could sit in your fridge forever, because of the vinegar and spices. And I do throw a little bit of sugar in there, but it's not the dominant flavor. I throw red peppers, red onion, green onion. And so you have all these savory flavors to balance out. And it's a new, I think for a lot of people, introducing the combination of a fruit chutney and a meat would be a new thing. But I've found that when I've done this, even with making, I made zucchini pancakes with apple chutney, it's been well received, because everyone kind of has memories of applesauce and sweet spices. So that's my approach to introducing new combinations or substituting traditional meal preparations, is kind of dropping little nuggets and introducing them in parts. And so I talked about steamed jasmine rice. I like to kind of strike a balance where some folks will say, hey, I want my pork chops, I want gravy, and my white rice, steamed white rice. So it will take having some balance there to say, hey, we're going to kind of shift things a little bit, try to make things a little bit healthier. We're not going to go with the braised pork or the ham hock. We're going to introduce a leaner cut of meat, but we'll give you steamed jasmine rice or steamed brown rice. I always love throwing around organic baby greens with or without dressing. This is a meal that could be prepared even without a vinaigrette, because you have even just the drippings from the pork kind of rolling over into the greens, and then also the chutney, just the apple juice, the natural juices from the apples, peppers, onions, kind of come in, olive oil, they're kind of coming out of the chutney. I always tell folks, and even in my own household, tell my kids, it's like, hey, we just sometimes eat greens plain and eat cut up vegetables plain, and it's something that takes some getting used to if you're accustomed to always having a sauce. I have an 8-year-old, and I'm telling him, like, you don't need ketchup on everything, because of not realizing the calories and how many calories are in, say, a bottle of dressing that's store-bought. So so some organic greens there. So this is my idea of introducing, like replacing maybe like a pork chop dish or a braised pork dish, which again, I love dearly. I love my carnitas, I love my barbecue pork, but can't have those things on an everyday basis. And I think we can introduce these types of things to provide our community with healthier options. And then here I dive into crafting delicious vegetarian meals. Back in 1993, 92, 93, I took my second job in the city at a place called Firefly. And it was my introduction to preparing vegan cuisine. And so I was tasked with every 2 weeks coming up with a vegan menu of at least two new vegan items on the menu every 2 weeks. And you're talking about a challenge. It was like, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna like run out of things to cook here. But I took on the challenge with the then chef, and we made some amazing things. Fire pots, which are kind of like, if you think like the ramen, noodle bowls, or pho. We were doing those types of things with vegetable stock and roasted vegetables and things, and just some amazing flavors. And at the time, myself as a chef and just as a lover of food, I was like, okay, how is this gonna go over? Where are we gonna get where's the meat at here? Where's the meat flavor in here? But I learned at that time how to manipulate and use ingredients in a way that, I just fell in love with vegan and vegetarian cuisine. And now it's some 20, 30 years later, there's no longer the challenge of, going to a restaurant as a vegetarian or vegan and getting like steamed noodles or, just boiled noodles or steamed broccoli on a plate. So I think so what I present here is just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit as it relates to, creating vegetarian vegan cuisine. We live in this melting pot, as you can see by the chefs and the people that are on the panel and everyone in the audience here. The Bay Area has a lot of rich culture. And so over the many years that I've been in food, I've always borrowed from, different cultures to introduce new flavors in vegetarian cuisine. I love Southeast Asian cuisine. I love Middle Eastern cuisine, Indian. It's just, we're just rich with so many flavors and spices, and you can find all those things right here in the Bay Area. So I try in my food preparation to, subtly introduce new spices, new, vegetables that, folks haven't had. If you stop into a produce market, in pretty much any farmer's market, you can stumble upon, some new items, new produce. And, here it's like, just talk about like, what do folks like to eat? You really want to know what people are accustomed to enjoying, what's culturally, being culturally sensitive to what you introduce, because I know a lot of the things that I would enjoy, others might not necessarily enjoy because it's a thing that's brand new to them. So for example, the vegetarian cuisine coupled with being culturally sensitive to those in the community and trying to strike a balance this is a dish that kind of leans to being kind of California centric. And so I think most folks love a little barbecue, right? So I make an in-house, barbecue sauce that I make a vegetarian version. It has lots of peppers, sweet peppers, jalapeno, onions, lots of savory spices, tomato, and you put that just on just about anything, tofu. And here I have it with, chickpeas, which give the protein that one needs in their diet. And it's, for me, one of the most carnivorous folks that I know. It's pretty filling. And with the tofu here, I smoked that, and it gives you, for those who are looking for meat kind of like flavor, you can do this with tofu or seitan, and it just gives really, really nice flavor. And so this dish, I actually braise the chickpeas in the barbecue sauce, so they take in a lot of the flavor. And so this dish, even hot or cold, the chickpeas coupled with some nice marinated and smoked tofu, just those two items alone are just really, really flavorful. And so pairing this dish with a little bit of braised kale, and again, my favorite, caramelized onions, just gives this big splash of California. Kale is so abundant in a lot of people's garden and in the produce markets, and with some of the farm partners out there, that kale has been trending for a while, and it's still trending in our kitchen, and it just makes for a great accompaniment to the chickpeas. And then to add more flavor and more vegetables onto that, doing a cabbage slaw, which I do with a little bit of jalapeno and a little rice wine vinegar, shaved carrot, a little shaved onion, just creates this interesting balance of like, okay, I'm getting my vegetables and my braised kale, but all of a sudden I've got this little, cabbage slaw that kind of, in some point, resembles like a corta, like a shredded cabbage, which is enjoyed in other cuisines. Just gives these other layers of flavor. So with vegetarian cuisine, my take on it is building layers of flavor. So, and I find that to be easier when you have like a strong base and strong, great ingredients to start off with. You can take any component of this particular dish here and almost enjoy it as a snack on its own. When you put them together, I think you capture the attention of those who might not normally enjoy vegetarian cuisine, with the spices and textures there. And then you throw in something familiar. Folks like cornbread, so throw in a little slice of cornbread, and it puts folks in it's a bit of a comfort food. And then here we have a black bean polenta cake. This is actually a dish that I want to say made back in the 90s, and it was experimenting at that time when I was like, what vegan dish am I gonna prepare? And I can't tell you how many vegetarian and vegan strata, we call them stratas, where they're layered polenta dishes with, a layer of roasted pepper polenta, spinach polenta, mushroom polenta. We form that in like a loaf pan and slice, then griddle it and add like a salsa fresca. So you have this vegetarian, vegetarian loaf that's kind of fried up, kind of like a cake, if you will, and kind of has the flavor of a tamale, if you will, because of the ground corn. This dish can be made vegetarian or vegan. A little bit of cheese, goes a long way, adds a lot of flavor to a dish like this. Taking the Mediterranean vegetables that we have abundant here, like eggplant, peppers, onions, zucchini, and grilling those with balsamic vinegar, a little bit of olive oil, basil, fresh herbs, charring the vegetables on the grill alone just gives them so much flavor. Folks aren't looking for that. They're not looking for the meat because so much flavor is there in the vegetables. And then just throwing in a little bit of organic baby spinach to top that off. But this is, again, an easy dish that can be made in bulk. You can make this in a hotel pan, and it can be prepared and you can have that ready even 2 days in advance, where that's made up, it's formed, refrigerated, and you can slice it and griddle it, and it holds very well. So it also holds heat very well if you're thinking about a dish that has to travel. And you could put with that, here I have a cilantro crema. You can put a cilantro crema, or you could put like a pico de gallo, or even a salsa rojo or salsa verde to really pick this up. And so I think it's a dish that's kind of fun. It's approachable. It's can have the flavor of a tamale. And just to kind of summarize with vegetarian cuisine, it's really comes down to the selection of the vegetables that you select, the quality of the grains, the combination of spices and herbs that can be included. And we have such a rich variety of those ingredients in our local market. Really trying to pull folks away from the salt, all of the salts and the other additives that are in, the prepackaged spices and things like that. For me, this is important that, I'm able to participate here is because of, just my personal, background coming from a space of being food insecure, being in a space where I actually had to steal food, in school. I just realized what it meant for me to be able to come to a space in my life where I had access to food, and food that was prepared for me, prepared by hands that really cared. Like I said, even today, someone hands me a plate of food and it just really warms my heart. So it's amazing that you're all in a space to be able to do that for the community. And I'm pretty sure that many, many people that receive the prepared meals, again, it could be their only meal of the day, and it's just showing some love. And during this time of COVID, it's just something that we need as a community, as a nation, to break down some of the barriers and some of the energy that we've had in this country over the last several years. Food can do it. Food is bringing them to the table. And I know I was going to break out with Arlene, who's on the call here, and we were just talking about, the food is kind of wrapping your arms around your community. And then just really knowing as individuals and as a team that we're making this huge impact on the community, and we're part of the change that we so need, and the support that many out there need that they don't maybe have in their household or in their in their immediate families. And so that interaction alone with going to an encampment or meeting up to hand off meals is a very special thing. And then just talking just briefly here on additional resources that are needed to support serving an even more wholesome meal. Is it kind of learning we can learn from each other? Is it equipment? Is it recipes? Is it software to put recipes together? How can we come together and even make it a more wholesome experience for our team and for those receiving the meals? I know with some of these calculations and nutritional analysis things that there's software and things out there to be able to provide that. And then just being able to gather ideas from one another as chefs and food preparers, serving this really large community. How do we come together and share meals? Share ideas. For me, being an African American chef, I know that for many years I was the only person of color in the kitchen, and for many years in the entire building. And so for me to work with my fellow brothers and sisters that are, from the melting pot here, from Asian communities, from all over Mexico, all over South America. It's huge for me to share a bit of a melting pot in what I do and how I present food. And I think that being able to do that and being culturally aware of what people, what folks need, you know, what's gonna work for them. I'm just really, really happy to be in this circular food economy, and the importance of it is, I think, bringing people of color to the forefront of the culinary space, and the impact that we're able to make during this time is really significant. And being able to highlight this on a local and a national stage is really huge. That our communities have been able to step up and feed one another is very important. So I want to thank you for listening to my presentation, and look forward to connecting with more of you in the future.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, just an incredible amount of appreciation to all three of you. I think for me, coming from a perspective as more of a nutritionist and working with patients around their health, just the incredible wisdom that I feel like the three of you are bringing to this conversation for other vendors to really hear this applied in these ways, and in ways that relate to their actual practice. And just hearing everybody's commitment to community and the potential for the intersections that, you know, have been created, I think for everybody, you know, but particularly many of the communities that I know I work with, many of the communities that I think folks who are here come from, this has been a horrible year. And it's been, yet at the same time, an opportunity for new intersections to evolve, and perhaps new ways of seeing that we can care for each other, and that we can show up, and that communities can take care of their needs. And hopefully moving forward in this country, maybe we can see a shift in what that means, and in the fact that we see people in the encampments as our brothers and sisters, and that could be any of us. And so what does it mean to really show up in a way that we're thinking of everybody's needs and not just our own? You know, and then I think the question of cultural humility really comes to that. You know, we've seen horrible racism this year on so many different levels. You know, I want to acknowledge, obviously, Black Lives Matter and what's been happening in the Asian community recently, and just really holding that, as Robert said, you know, maybe there's ways that these conversations, particularly around something like food that has such a caretaking aspect to it, can really start to shift the dial around some of that. So just thank you so much, all three of you, for the wisdom that you brought to this, and especially for how open you were with your own personal experiences and what brought you personally to this point, because I think that really can help it resonate more with everybody who's listening. I want to go to the question actually that Cheryl asked in the side. Sorry, it's going to take me a second to scroll up, but I think the essence of the question was whether she should be thinking in terms of applying, creating her own cultural meals in a healthy way for these meals, or be thinking in terms of the cultures of the communities that the food is being distributed to. You know, and in some ways, I think that the way that Robert summarized it just now, I think maybe both, right? I think that each of you who's here today, who's part of All In, who's one of the vendors, brings your own cultural background and your own rich experience with food to the table when you're creating the food that you make. And yet at the same time, it is really important that that food, you know, it's not that a rutabaga is showing up in front of someone and they're like, what do I do with this? So, I mean, I think that it's both of those things. And so one thing is asking, you know, so if you know, whether you're providing meals through All In, whether you're doing it through another forum, making sure to educate yourself about what community-based organizations that food is going to, and what community-based organizations are partnering with whatever entity you're being hired to cook for, so that you can be aware, is this going to encampments? Is this going to, to unhoused folks? Is this going to elders, who maybe have their own specific issues? Is this going to primarily Latinx communities, to primarily African-American communities? Where is this food going? Is a good way to situate yourself. And then by all means, if you want to merge in some of the flavors that you feel are most, relevant to you, I don't see any reason that can't happen in the process. But I think, again, it is being mindful that the person receiving it feels that it's something that they can relate to.
When I deliver meals to the EOC, the East Oakland Collective, they still want me to do Mexican American food, but we are catering to a lot of African American community at the East Oakland Collective too. So one thing that my partner has noticed was that sometimes my food can seem a little culturally obscure, meaning that sometimes it could pass off as Latino cuisine, and then sometimes it could pass off as like, wow, you wouldn't know if it's Asian or Latino, or if it's African. It's like, you don't know, because and I do that intentionally sometimes for sure, because I am aware of the people that I'm feeding, because I do ask. And sometimes something that we tend to forget too is when there's pregnancy in the community as well. That's another thing that we should keep in mind. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually I want to invite really anybody, but Robert or Renee, if you want to kind of expand on those thoughts I had presented, because again, I come from a very different background than pretty much everybody here as far as my relationship to food and, and the conversation, because I'm always talking about it with the person, with the consumer, who is my patient and who probably has limited food access. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, if all you got is a corner store, how do you figure out how to eat healthy? What are the options, and what are the options? I work a lot with the idea that people's traditional diets are in many ways the healthiest thing they can do, whatever their traditional background is. And that for many people, when they came to the US, whether that was a recent generation or many generations ago, that diet changed. And over time, it's probably changed even more. And so I think that, when we talk about some of the things that have been added to traditional foods that we think of now as unhealthy, I bet there were iterations of those foods that used to be a lot healthier before the sort of standard American practices kind of permeated. So really thinking in those terms, and what can we go back to, and what can we embrace, and how can food feel like that connection?
I was going to say, just quickly to your point, Michelle, about just kind of how things have shifted. I kind of see a bit of a full circle. I grew up 70s, early 80s in Berkeley, where my stepmom, her mom, who I called my granny, had about 700 square feet of garden space, and she grew like 25 different items in there that amazed me at the time. And then fast forward 25 years, whatever, and farm to table. People were thinking about eating farm to table. It's like, kind of, how did we eat before? It was farm to table, right? It was this thing. It's like, that's how we've always eaten. Pulling a tomato off the vine and just enjoying the ripeness of what we've grown. And I think as a society just kind of got away from that. I think, probably during the wars, and I don't know. But it's just refreshing just to be able to share with folks in the community, a lot of younger folks, that, hey, this is how people survive. This is how we eat. This is where food comes from, and being able to share that as it relates to health and access, that, a lot of people, now we're growing food. Like, farming is a thing. Farming was a thing, farming is what sustained us. It's what a lot of us, our parents and our grandparents and great grandparents did for a living, farmed. And so I think it's a beautiful thing that, we have the partners in the community, and that there's food out there, and that there's the opportunity for folks to learn healthier ways of eating and preparing food.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree 100%. And I think the idea that those things feel accessible to people, because I think that in many ways with that circle, right, also came a bunch of gentrification, right? And that changed like how the Bay Area feels. And that changed like, what does farm to table mean, right? Like who has access to farm to table? And
Right.
really being able to say, I mean, it's like for me, like I'm an herbalist and I work in sort of integrative medicine, and a premise in integrative medicine is really that a lot of things that communities practiced traditionally, like are suddenly sort of ripped out, gentrified, and turned into something that then people can't even afford to do in this country. And so I think really recuperating that and saying, hey, wait, this was ours and this is going to be ours again.
Amen.
And so, and I feel like the work that all of you are doing so supports that, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I feel like that's exactly what happened to the organic food movement. I feel like it's become such a high priced commodity that you have to be an elite or in a part of society to have access to it. And so the people who really need it the most can't even get it anymore, you know, because we know the importance of eating clean and organic food.
I'm gonna kind of ask, I don't know if we have the option, I don't know if there's any way to pull everybody. So I feel like I hear sort of all four of our voices and I wanna make sure other people have a chance to chime in. Do people want, and I wanna continue hearing all three of your voices. Do people wanna go into breakout rooms, or should, since we're only about 16 of us, should we just stay here? In which case I hope everybody who didn't speak so far feels comfortable chiming in. Looks like everybody who's chiming in wants to stay. So I really want to invite, you know, I think we've really focused on food in the African American community, food in the Latinx community, you know, and food in the Filipino Asian community. I want to invite anybody else who maybe feels like they have some thoughts on their own community's food that they want to share, or any questions or any comments on sort of the way this discussion has gone.
Hi, chefs. This is Rubelet, and thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciated the, the guidance on how to prepare your meals from traditional and transforming it to something more nutritious and healthy. I wanted to ask, one of the chefs mentioned amino acids as a source of umami. Can somebody tell me what this is so that maybe I can incorporate it? Thank you.
Amino acids, I guess the best way I can describe amino acids is almost the flavor of soy sauce. And like I mentioned, the reason I like to use that because instead of using salt, you provide a whole lot more depth of flavor. But that is in conjunction with nutritional yeast, and nutritional yeast is the byproduct of cheese curds. But it also provides that mouthfeel, that oomph, that almost that meatiness to
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. What exactly is amino acids? Unfortunately, I do have to, research into that a little bit more. But if any of the Michelle, please.
Well, where do you get it?
Oh, well, you can get it at any your typical health stores like Trader Joe's or
Okay.
Berkeley Bowl or Farmer Joe's around here in Oakland, and you could also probably find it at like Smart and Final too, if you ask.
In essence, it's sort of a natural way to bring in this sort of savory flavor. And so you're adding just like a little boost of nutrition. I mean, you're not getting active proteins from it, but you are adding just a little boost of nutrition. And, you know, with nutritional yeast, it's something that when I was vegan and many of my vegan friends sort of use a lot of, and I don't, Enrique, you probably know better than me if it is a cheese byproduct, but I know that it is actually vegan. So it's something that's used as the basis for a lot of vegan-y, cheesy flavored things. Any other comments, questions? I would love to hear more sort of if anyone wants to share about either things that felt meaningful to them because it resonated with some of their cultural food experiences, or things that were left out. If there's things you feel like other chefs might want to know about communities that we didn't touch upon.
I'd like to ask a question. And that is, I did see certainly with Chef Renee talking about really incorporating more vegetables in the meal. And I totally appreciate where Chef Robert was talking about how to use grains more to create a more interesting vegetarian or especially vegan meal. But what I'm wondering is there's a bit of a disconnect between what we were talking about in the last webinar, where we were to concentrate, pretty much half, if not more, of the meal toward vegetables and very little grain or other things, not protein related. So can we talk a little bit more about that nutritionally as far as that balance and trying to accomplish all these different goals?
Thank you for bringing up that question. And for everybody else, we have that 2-page document that is the basis of the all-in nutrition standards and what you can sort of continue to cycle back to if you have any questions about how to balance the meals. I did feel like that was sort of filtering through all of these presentations, but I'd love to have that elaborated on.
The guidelines set forth are very, I think, very aligned, because 50%, if not more, vegetables and non-starchy vegetables, about 25%, if not a little bit more, of proteins or healthy fats, and then 25%, if not even less, of grains or starches. And I kind of touched that on my mountings a little bit, but the time was a little bit tight. But it's very important to. I know that in our Latin American cuisine, we don't eat as much vegetables as we normally do. And the way I really love to sneak in the veggies, I mentioned before that for about 100 people, for grains to meet the requirements, 25%, you would use about 6.25 quarts, 6.25 quarts of grains. But what I like to do is I like to go a little less and probably do about 4 quarts of grain and substitute 2.5 with more chopped up vegetables, and that kind of fills in that gap. And then with the proteins, I go a little bit more. Instead of the 6 ounces, I go a little bit more, over 8 ounces. And the veggies, I didn't really get to touch on as much as I'd like to, but I know, for example, organic vegetables, sometimes some do tend to get expensive. And the way I like to balance that out, I like to incorporate, just like I do my menus, I have my expensive cuts of meats with the cheaper cuts of meats, and it all kind of balances each other out. I do the same thing with my vegetables, I have, like, everybody knows kale and chard is very expensive, but if you stretch that out with maybe some carrots and maybe some cabbage, which are a lot more cheaper, it'll help you bring down the cost even lower. But the way I like to do sneak in more veggies is, like I said again, sneak it in with the grains, and then I'll sneak it in with my braises when I cook with the proteins, the meats itself. I'll sneak in even some more vegetables there, like spinach. I always cook with a lot of onions and garlics. The alliums are really good. I know we touched on that when we didn't talk a lot about the oils and healthy types of oils, but that's something that I believe is very important as well. The type of oils that we keep into our bodies, with organic is best, something with the high heating temperatures, because oils tend to burn, and that's really highly carcinogenic, not recycling the same oils. But I'll pass the mic on to the other chefs.
So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chef Enrique. And again, great question, I think, as a Cheryl.
Yes.
So the way in which I kind of presented the meals and how I like to deal with that type of situation is, if you pack enough flavor in, say, your beans or your greens or everything you're preparing, what I like to think is that each item can kind of stand alone. So for example, I presented a few vegetarian dishes. If you need to plop in a grilled skinless boneless chicken breast there, it would fit just fine. If you wanted to take away the tofu, or you can kind of interchange, kind of add more greens in, take out beans. So I think that's an approach that I've taken when trying to balance out, making the plate, a nice square meal.
Thanks, Robert. Renee, do you want to chime in on that question? And then actually, I think we're almost at time to wrap up.
Yeah, I just had to fulfill the needs of the people that had the restrictions. There was 50 meals, and 5 of them were vegetarian or even vegan. And me being Filipino and me not even having anything of that sorts, I had to then do some research, so the rice and the salad and the kale, that's an easy. So I did it's a Filipino inspired kale salad, which, like Chef Robert said, you can easily put a barbecue chicken on top of that, and it's a little bit healthier than my thank you bowl version, which is with the rice. You see, so then I played on it with, hey, if this was vegetarian or vegan, what else can I substitute that piece of chicken with? Tofu, cauliflower, just anything that will make it or fit the standard somewhat. Plus, you're playing with vegetables, not a lot of calories compared to chicken. If you take 8 ounces of the vegetables and 8 ounces of chicken, the calories aren't the same. So you want to load up on those vegetables a little bit more so you can meet that standard.
Cheryl, I hope that addressed your question. I mean, I think on a different level, another way or another thing that's come up is sort of, are these nutrition guidelines and some of these other guidelines around sustainability and organic, are those expectations around where we need to be right now? Or are those sort of where the direction we're trying to move? Because I think even amongst conversations with the chefs, I think, for a small vendor coming in, it can be very expensive to make changes, to be able to suddenly be cooking organic, to be able to suddenly use more expensive oils, to have alternative protein sources, and then packaging, right? If we talk about sustainability and packaging, it's worth it in the long run for our world, but what does that mean for the individual vendor? So I think that, I really appreciate your question, because I think part of it is sort of taking it all in and sort of letting it percolate and moving in that direction, but not feeling like the expectation is that you have to be doing everything a certain way right now or tomorrow. I think it's still a learning curve for for the county, for everybody to figure out what are the best ways to support vendors in moving in this direction. Because we're in this COVID moment and this whole initiative has popped up, but it's part of a longer term vision around the circular food economy. And so I think it's constantly an evolution, and what I hope, just from my own personal experience of seeing deeply food insecure communities for many years, in my clinical practice, I hope we're moving in this direction where this kind of food access is going to become something that all of us are talking about more regularly. And so I think, how do you as a vendor fit into that? How do you as a vendor come to that with the costs and expenses that you're facing and get the support that you need to do that in sustainable ways?